All right, thanks everybody. Welcome to Dharma Live Online once again. So, to reiterate, tonight I wanted to talk about something that's maybe more of the 10,000 foot view of why we would even do something like this in the first place. And so, basically, what that is that it's really states versus traits, and that meditation culture, Dharma culture in America has, I would say, no fault of its own, become a little bit too obsessed or emphasizing a kind of state of mind that one can meditate oneself into to transcend the kind of boring, mundane, dukkha, difficulty of life. And if we were able to achieve that, accomplish that task, and that would have some kind of meaningful impact on the way that we live. And a lot of us maybe operate under that assumption. I know that I did for years, not even really knowing that I was operating under that assumption. And so that's kind of what I would call state chasing. I'm trying to develop a state of mind that's going to have meaningful implications on the rest of my life. Now, I'm not saying that that's certainly part of what we're doing here, but it's not the end sum game. The other thing is looking at traits. So we have a lot of traits, and I think the Buddhist tradition addresses this in a meaningful way, but it doesn't always get talked about so much, and that is the ethical path factors of the Eightfold Path, which I'm sure we'll get into at some point, about how we talk, how we speak, how we think about ourselves, the internal voice, how we live in the world, our relationship to money, and all of the actions and all the behaviors that we do. Those are very much traits. You might notice you have traits, or we could maybe use the word habits. I think the word traits is better. Trait is kind of a habit that's well established. And I don't know if you know, I have certain speaking habits that aren't great. I have some behavioral traits that I'm not super thrilled about. And so my goal in life, and somebody who's been in recovery and therapy a long time, is to try to change that, because that seems to have real, practical, pragmatic ramifications on the quality of how I live my life. The changing of one's behavior, the changing of one's traits for the better, seems to be way more important, way more useful than whether or not I can meditate into some kind of pleasant, mystical mind state. Now, another dilemma here, or kind of reality of kind of Buddhism in the way that they kind of think about things. And as you know, in Buddhism, there's a lot of emphasis on suffering and why do we suffer, and can we stop suffering, and can we put it to an end? And that sort of seems to be the territory. Uh, that's why I'm interested in this stuff. If I didn't suffer, I wouldn't bother with any of this crap, to be honest with you. I mean, you know what I mean? If I didn't suffer, this would be totally unnecessary. I just get on with it and just live my life and be fine. But that option has not been made available to me. So yet I find myself doing this work. And so one school of Buddhist thought would say we suffer because we don't see things clearly. It's a kind of misunderstanding, a perceptual misunderstanding of life or the mind or reality, and how reality works, and how we view that's kind of misaligned. It's not accurate, and it creates all this conflict, which is certainly true to some extent. Another school of Buddhism would say, well, that's true, but really what our problem is just kind of bad behavior. We sort of don't know what to do with ourselves. And it's probably a little bit of both. For me, it's been both. It's that I oftentimes I don't see things clearly. I don't see things accurately. I see distorted views of things, which gives rise to behaviors that don't really work. And so that those behaviors that don't really work, as they're developed over time, they become traits, they become habits. Um, so so let's just kind of zoom out again. So why, maybe this is an interesting question. Why do you think Buddhism in the last 30 or 40 years has become so popular in American culture? Why would we explain that? What was the appetite? In which ways was Buddhism, as it arrived on the shores of America, in what ways was it kind of tailor-made for us? And if we kind of think back to when this stuff really started to take on, we're talking late 60s, early 70s, Vietnam War era, civil rights. I wasn't around for it, but like, we think things are fucked up nowadays, but like, America hasn't been great, like ever. I don't know where this "Make America Great Again" bullshit comes from. Like we've always had problems. And then the 60s, early 70s was very much time like that. And after the Vietnam War and after the whole hippie drug revolution thing, and people kind of were just disenfranchised. Kind of similar, actually, just to take a side note here, kind of similar to what was happening in Europe after World War II, which gave rise to the existential philosophy movement. And I think existential philosophy and Buddhist thought have insane parallels. And it was kind of just a culture of people who are disenfranchised and not really sure what to do, looking at the world and thinking, you know what, there's really nothing here for me. And then enters Buddhism, enters words like enlightenment, awakening, the East, the mystic, romantic element of this other religious culture that's really more of a science of mind. It's not really a God, religion, belief system. It's kind of a way of understanding the mind. And for the goal, of course, this is the way it's passed down. Of course, I would reject it, but that, that if you learn this kind of advanced meditation system passed down by the uh, Buddhist tradition, you can meditate into a place where you actually won't suffer anymore. And they would call that enlightenment, which I would say all they did was they just reinvented heaven. They reinvented the concept of heaven and they just put it in a Buddhist packaging, which was a little bit more attractive than a Christian, Judeo-Christian, Protestant package. Same concept, different package, frankly. And so this is the beginning of what I would call state chasing. People think they're going to meditate, and it's kind of a lazy American thing if you think about it, right? Like I'm suffering, I'm unhappy, I make bad choices, I don't behave well in my relationships, I'm shitty with money, like the world's kind of a drag and a pain in the ass. I'm just gonna meditate so I don't have to deal with that stuff. I'm going to become enlightened, and then I won't have to deal and address with my trauma or my shitty childhood or my bad behavior. I'm going to like meditate my way out of that. Right. And then of course we have people like Trungpa Rinpoche and other people who claim to be that person whose behavior was actually a horrible criminal behavior. Right? We see this in Buddhist teachers. So this clearly, this idea of I'm going to meditate into this enlightened state and not have to take responsibility for the day-to-day monotony of having to live in this world and dealing with sexuality and with racism and sexism and classism and money and all of the kind of stuff that most of us probably find irritating. I know that I do. We think that we're somehow going to be above all that, which I think is just a really kind of naive, foolish position to take. But I understand how attractive it is. And I have the great fortune of being a drug addict and an alcoholic because I tried the same thing. I just used drugs and alcohol, which actually worked much better than this other thing. Like if you really want to be above it all, that's why call it getting high. You can't actually be above it all. It's temporary and it comes with a whole range of side effects that are probably unfavorable, but it is an option. And so that is this kind of position that we have of I'm chasing a state of mind that's going to kind of divorce me from the responsibility, or I would say the dukkha, of just having to live in a complicated, tragic, scary, unreliable world, right? And so this is kind of what all of us have inherited 30, 40 years into this American Dharma project. A lot of people have fallen down that trap. I have. I'm not blaming anybody for this. I'm not trying to get on my high horse in any way, shape, or form. This is just kind of the reality of the situation. And so, and then and this nibbana that we did in the meditation, this idea that, the Eightfold Path is the path that leads to nibbana, which is the end of suffering, which I actually kind of reject all of that. I don't think that's actually what's in the original teachings. I think that the Buddha is actually weary of those kind of ideas. So when we look at nibbana as a state of mind, it leads third noble truth leads into fourth noble truth, the non-reactive state of mind of nibbana, the absence of greed, hatred, and confusion. That brings me into what we would call right view. So nibbana is not just a state of wisdom. It's a state of understanding. It's a state of non-reactivity. It's an ethical space. It's a space of harmlessness. It's a more selfless space. It's a space where I'm not so trying to get what I want and avoid what I don't want, and not really caring who I have to step on to get what I want and avoid what I don't want. It actually includes other people. And there's a sensitivity towards other people. There's a sensitivity of interdependence, of seeing that we're all in this together. There's probably a spirit of generosity, of openness, of all Brahma Viharas, kindness and care, gratitude. Those are all Nibbanic properties. And so that's not the end of the path. It's not like we trudge down this eightfold path and we get to this Nibbanic experience of Buddhist heaven, as I just outlined. No, it's that kind of sensitivity that you've all experienced. You wouldn't, spend money each month and come to a group like this and go sit retreats and be doing this for many years, as many of you have. You wouldn't be doing any of this if you didn't recognize there was something about it that had value, that actually had some weight, that actually had some fucking teeth. This shit works. Right? And so that Nibbanic space, that kind of cool-mindedness, what that does, that actually brings me into the Eightfold Path. That brings me into, and an Eightfold Path is just another way to say that in a colloquial sense. It brings me into a lifestyle that I actually want. Or at least it brings me into a lifestyle that I feel like I'm at least now heading in the right direction. And the first one, of course, is right view. And that's kind of this, seeing things clearly, seeing things more accurately, understanding the way that I kind of talk about wisdom is understanding very clearly the limitations of my humanity, really understanding and embracing the reality that there's probably going to be a lot of shit I'm not going to be able to do. I'm very limited. I'm financially limited. I'm limited by the demands of the body. I'm limited by the psychology of my traumatized mind that I have to deal with every day. I got a lot of limits. And I got to be honest with myself, and I got to be really clear about what those are. I also have to be aware of and optimistic that there's also some possibilities. What's possible? And that's a very Samaditi right view. That's now we're getting into kind of like the reality of the situation. Like, what do I think I can pull off with the conditions that I have, and can I lead myself into that direction? That having a vision of that, and then some imagination of like, well, what would I like based on reality, based on limitations and possibilities? What would I like the rest of my life to look like here? What do I think I can actually pull off and feel good about that? And then to do any of that, I'm going to have to probably develop some habits and some traits that head in that direction. And I'm probably going to have to let go of some of these things. So I think that, it's not like states or traits. They're definitely integrated, but I think we have to see them as integrated because for me, like, if I'm in a reactive state of mind, if I'm in a suffering state of mind, if I'm in a selfish state of mind, if I'm in a state of mind that's kind of hating on the world, that's looking at things from the dark side, uh, then I'm probably not going to do very well. I'm probably not going to be that pleasant to be around, first of all. People aren't going to really probably want to talk to me. I'm going to, that mind state is going to, the Buddha says the mind is the forerunner of all things. Mind precedes everything. So it's in my best interest to develop a state of mind. But this is, again, this is the lobby of the building. This is not the end. This is the beginning, right? And then from that space, I can move through the world. I can make better choices for myself that are based on things that are more in line with my desires, that are more in line with an authentic representation of what I want my life to look like, what I want to do. I'm going to be able to head in that direction. And so they kind of go hand in hand. And so when you look at the way the Eightfold Path is structured, you have meditation, which is about developing these Nibbanic states, developing a mind that you actually don't mind living in. That's pretty important. If you don't want to live in your mind, you ain't going to want to live in the world. Because before you walk out the door of your house every day, you're already in that mind. So there's, of course, there's a whole endeavor about trying to cultivate a mind that's present, that's easeful, that's kind, that's friendly. But that's only in support of how I go out and interact with the world. And the more I feel better about the way I interact with the world through my speech, through my actions, through my relationship to money, my relationship with other people, that actually contributes to the quality of my mind. But the measuring stick, of course, over time is that um, I feel better about myself when I am living, when my traits and my actions and my behaviors are aligned with my values, with what I think is important. So alignment is like kind of the crucial thing here. And there's this word that often gets translated as shame in the Buddhist tradition. It's this word hiri, which means how I see myself in my own eyes. And that is by and large how I see myself through my own eyes is how I kind of assess how I'm living, how I'm doing. Am I living? Am I, I value honesty. How honest am I? I want to be generous. How generous am I? Am I actually living up? Are my values and my behaviors, are they kind of at least somewhat in the same ballpark? So that's kind of the thing to think about. I'm going to give you a couple prompts, but I'm going to put you in some groups and let you guys talk about this. I hope it's enough to give you some stuff to think about, but really to just kind of reflect for yourself, how has this been for you? Um, have you found that you've been kind of chasing these states? Have you found that some of your behaviors have been better, have been different? Um, where have you landed with those? Where would you like things to head? So I'll put a couple questions in there, and when I hit the button, you will just appear in some groups with others, so you can have some conversation, and when we'll pop back in about 15 minutes and see how that goes.